Momentum expands quickly, but distance does not stabilize. The April 7th Asia session forms across multiple prior session boundaries at once. Price accelerates into the open. Then hesitation appears. The session begins with a gap and immediately absorbs the upper boundary of the March 26th U.S. session and the lower boundary of the March 25th U.S. session. This is not a clean breakout location. It is layered interaction. Multiple session memories are compressed into one formation. Volatility expands inside that overlap, but position does not establish beyond it. This is relocation without persistence. Price travels across multiple levels quickly, but it cannot remain outside them. The structure gains density. Movement becomes unstable. From this location, distance opens toward the March 25th upper boundary. Price reaches that boundary. Then reaction appears almost immediately. Continuation does not extend. It begins to reach toward the March 17th U.S. session lower boundary. But the move stretches before stabilizing. Pullbacks deepen before holding. Reaction speed increases. The session is now positioned near a descending pressure line. Slope introduces resistance to continuation. Interaction increases. Price begins to move between boundaries and returns repeatedly. This is rotation. Rotation is repeated movement between defined structural boundaries. It reflects lack of commitment outside structure. Distance becomes shorter. Each move reaches a boundary faster. This is compression. Compression is not quiet behavior. It is reduced space between overlapping session structures. The more sessions overlap, the less distance is available. This is where friction builds. Moves fail to hold outside structure. Price returns into prior session ranges. The same sequence repeats. The session forms at a location where distance is still available. From this position, the next boundary becomes reachable. Price reaches that boundary. Reaction appears. The move does not hold outside. It returns inside. This is containment. Containment means movement remains inside inherited structure. Even with volatility expansion, relocation does not occur. Now the overlap becomes more visible. Each new session does not create new structure. It forms on top of existing session memory. This is critical. Even though prior session memory is removed visually in this chart, the structure still respects those levels. Every session anchor forms where previous interaction already existed. This is not random. If you reconstruct earlier session memory, you will see that every session boundary aligns with prior structure. This explains why sessions repeatedly form at the same locations. This is how structure builds through time. And deeper understanding comes from studying how these layers accumulate across sessions. Now movement begins to slow further. Continuation attempts stall earlier. Pullbacks extend deeper. Reaction appears faster near boundaries. Holding becomes more difficult. Distance expectation compresses. Tolerance becomes narrower. Failure frequency increases. If sessions continue forming inside these overlapping structures, distance remains limited. If price begins to hold outside these boundaries, tolerance must expand. Execution conditions remain in transition. Price continues to move, but continuation does not extend. The April 8th U.S. session forms directly within prior session overlap. The location remains unchanged. The session forms inside previously established structure and immediately attempts to reach toward the lower boundary of the March 17th U.S. session box. Price approaches that level, but cannot sustain interaction there. Reaction appears early. This is the second attempt to move beyond the descending pressure zone. Both attempts fail to establish position outside. Failure frequency increases. Each attempt travels less distance before reacting. Each move loses stability faster. The move does not hold outside structure. It returns back inside. This is containment under pressure. Volatility remains active, but it expands inside the same structural boundaries. The session forms at a location where distance is already constrained. From this position, the next boundary becomes reachable. Price reaches that boundary. Reaction appears quickly. Movement slows. Continuation attempts stall earlier than before. Pullbacks extend deeper before stabilizing. Tolerance narrows. The structure becomes more reactive. Small movements trigger faster responses. Holding pressure increases. Now price moves back into the April 7th Asia session range. It does not remain outside. It returns inside structure again. This is repeated failure of continuation. The same sequence continues. Movement toward boundary. Reaction. Return. This is rotation. Rotation now occurs inside compressed space. Compression here is created by overlapping sessions across multiple days. Space becomes limited. Each move interacts faster. There is no clear expansion path. This creates persistent friction. Price is forced to negotiate each boundary. Movement cannot extend freely. This is where execution conditions shift. Distance expectation compresses further. Failure frequency increases. Tolerance becomes narrower. Holding requires more precision. Now observe how quickly reactions appear. Price reaches a boundary. Reaction begins immediately. There is no delay. This is high interaction frequency. It signals reduced margin for error. Each attempt must hold outside structure to create continuation. But holding fails repeatedly. This is why movement appears active but does not progress. Volatility without relocation. If compression continues across these overlapping sessions, distance remains limited. If displacement begins to establish position outside the March 17th boundary, tolerance must widen. Environment is still processing. Price stabilizes briefly, but movement remains restricted. The April 8th Asia session forms at the lower boundary of the April 8th US session. The session inherits structure. It does not create new space. Position remains inside the April 7th Asia session range. The structure tightens further. This is containment within containment. Volatility fluctuates, but distance does not expand. Each move reaches a boundary faster than before. Reaction appears sooner. This is advanced compression. Compression reduces available space. It increases interaction frequency. Price moves between boundaries. Returns again. This is rotation. Rotation here becomes tighter. Distance contracts further. The session forms at a location where distance is already limited. From this position, the next boundary remains reachable. Price reaches that boundary. Reaction appears immediately. Movement slows again. Continuation fails again. The move does not hold outside structure. It returns inside. This sequence repeats. Now relocation attempts weaken. Price still travels across multiple session levels, but cannot establish position outside them. This is relocation without persistence. Relocation requires holding outside structure. Without holding, the move collapses back into interaction. The environment shifts from movement to interaction. Structure becomes dense. Boundaries are closer together. Reaction speed increases. Holding pressure builds. This is where execution becomes difficult. Distance expectation compresses further. Tolerance narrows again. Failure frequency remains elevated. Every movement is tested quickly. This is friction. Now observe how sessions continue to form on top of previous session memory. This is not accidental. Each session anchor forms where prior interaction already existed. Even though earlier session memory is removed in this chart for clarity, the structure continues to respect those levels. If prior session memory is reconstructed, every session anchor aligns with previous boundaries. This explains why sessions form where they do. This explains why price repeatedly reacts at the same levels. This is the foundation of session-based structure. Sessions do not create structure. They reveal where structure already exists. And deeper understanding comes from studying how these session memories accumulate across time. If sessions continue forming inside these overlapping structures, distance remains limited. If price begins to establish position outside these compressed boundaries, tolerance must expand. Execution conditions remain in transition.